What would be very surprising would be if he raised Lazarus from the dead and walked on water and turned water into wine. And that, of course, did not happen.
Of course,
well, why couldn't people?
Because of course he didn't walk on water, and of course he didn't raise Lazarus from the dead. Because what? What do you mean? Of course that didn't happen. Hey guys, Pastor Mark here. Today we're doing another Pastor Mark Reacts. Let's go. What clip are we watching? Oh, Joe Rogan. Okay.
When they get together and they talk about all the values that Jesus proposed, if Jesus is the higher power, it gives them this sort of, again, moral scaffolding to live their life.
Yes. Well, Jesus would probably on the whole provide a fairly good moral scaffolding. Not totally, but
right.
He was ahead of his time anyway.
So you do think he was a real person?
Most of the scholars I've talked to say he probably was. The evidence is not great, of course.
Hold on. The evidence is not great. The people who are skeptical about Jesus tend to throw these lines around. Even the question, or saying, you believe Jesus existed and the evidence is not great. And then they just move on. No, the evidence is so insurmountable that Jesus was a historical figure that most scholars, you can go and read scholars from conservative to liberal, and they would say the evidence is insurmountable so much that you could read an 800-page book on Jesus, and they will relegate the conversation about whether Jesus actually ever existed to a footnote. And they'll go, look, I'm going to write an 800-page book on Jesus. I'm not even going to spend 5 chapters or 5 pages on whether he existed, because it's not even a question. So we're going to move on. He said, the evidence is, every scholar I've ever read, it's like, yeah, of course he existed. What he said, was he who he was? That's the debate. And the reason we know that is not only because the unbelievable biblical evidence, but there were people, most scholars would say about 12 people, outside of the Bible that even had anti-Christian agendas that wrote about Jesus. Historians of the time, Josephus, Suetonius, Pliny the Younger, Tacitus, where they would say, Jesus Christ was a historical figure. Here's what happened to him. He died under Pontius Pilate. He was crucified. His believers thought he rose from the dead. He had a whole group of followers. Nero was burning people on crosses in his garden to keep his garden lit by night, who followed this man named Jesus Christ. These are people outside of Christianity. They have no Christian agenda, and they're writing about the person called Jesus Christ as a historical figure. So the evidence isn't very great, it's just false, and that's why I wish people would not just take these phrases of these guys' debate and then just go, oh yeah, of course the evidence. Well, of course Richard Dawkins says that the evidence isn't great. The evidence is insurmountable. Pick up 5 books on Jesus. I don't care if it's the most liberal secular scholar. They go, yeah, he existed. He wasn't who all the Christians think he was. He definitely existed. So anyway, I don't agree with Professor Dawkins on this particular point.
Actually, because a wandering preacher called Yeshua or Yehoshua, would it not be surprising? It's a common name,
right.
And there are plenty of wandering preachers. What would be very surprising would be if he raised Lazarus from the dead and walked on water and turned water into wine. And that, of course, did not happen.
Of course it didn't happen, because of course he didn't walk on water, and of course he didn't raise Lazarus from the dead, because what? What do you mean? Of course that didn't happen. So there's all kinds of built assumptions. One of the assumptions is he's coming from, of course, Richard Dawkins is coming from a naturalistic position, which is a faith position in the end. But he's coming from a naturalistic explanation of the universe. So if you start out with a naturalistic philosophy on life, and it is a philosophy, it's not just science, it's a philosophy that says the material world is all you have. There is no immaterial anything. So the material world is what you have, naturalism is like it. So things like this just don't happen. And if you start there, then of course your deduction is going to be, well, of course he didn't walk on water. But you got to work backwards from there. Go read C.S. Lewis's book on miracles. Read, Alvin Plantinga. Read John Polkinghorne. Read John Lennox. Oxford scholars, guys who hang out with Richard Dawkins. They all say, no, you're starting with the wrong premise. Of course, if you start out with miracles can't happen, then you're going to go, well, of course Jesus didn't raise Lazarus from the dead. But that's not, the more we delve into the universe, the more we're discovering the kinds of complexity the universe has with quarks and dark matter and quantum mechanics, the more the old version of science, the Newtonian physics, the stuff that Richard Dawkins was schooled in back in the 40s at Oxford in the 50s and 60s, whatever, the more and more that stuff gets retired, more and more scholars actually open up to the idea that, some of this stuff actually it's not that implausible.
Some people just drink water either. Why do they have to drink wine? He's trying to get people drunk? Like, what's that all
Well,
about?
that's a separate question. But I think the point I'm making
Love
is that
you,
it's
Joe.
a very
I want to come on your show, Joe. There's a whole Twitter thing going on. They want me to get on the Joe Rogan show. Joe, I would love to come on your show and talk to you about all this. It'd be awesome. Hanging out, # Joe Rogan.
There's a woman named Megan Phelps. Do you know who she is?
I think I do.
She's
yes.
Fred Phelps from the
Yes,
Westboro
yes,
Baptist
yes.
Church. She was his granddaughter. And
Yes.
amazing woman.
Yes.
And she wound up communicating with people through all things Twitter.
Yes.
And met her husband.
So she
through Twitter.
rebelled against her
Yes.
father. Yes. Her
Her
grandfather.
grandfather. Yeah, she wound up leaving the church and wound up realizing that she was trapped in some sort of a Christian cult. And a very hateful one.
Yes.
They're the God hates fags people.
Exactly,
right?
I know. And the same was true of Nate Phelps, who was...
So what they're doing here, and I understand what they're doing, they're trying to talk about how people leave the faith when they grow up. And then they take maybe the most extreme example. Westboro Baptist Church, okay, he says, it's like she left a Christian cult. No, that is a Christian cult. That is literally a family of people who believe stuff that is so crazy that no Christian, biblical Protestant Christian would go, yeah, that's what we sign up for. That's what we believe. So they take this extreme version of Christianity and say, look, this girl left it and now she's been enlightened. It's like, yeah, I know. She left a very bad version of Christianity. And so it's classic too. Like if I was ever debating a Muslim on a stage at a university, I'm not sure in order to tell them that they should leave Islam that I would use the really bad versions of Islam and say, look what it is. Look, do you believe this? They go, I don't even believe half that stuff. And be like, oh, all right. So don't use extreme examples of things and then say, look, this is normative. That's not the version of Christianity that a biblical Christian would follow. So when we're talking about Christianity, we're evaluating, yes, is it true, as Joe talked about, that people grow up and they leave the faith? 100%. That happens about a lot of faiths. It happens about almost every worldview. If you grow up as a 5-year-old inundated with atheism and you become 20 and you go to a philosophy class and you realize atheism's not actually tenable, you're going to walk away from the faith of your parents in that vein too. So it's kind of a rite of passage in a sense of what a lot of people do. They grow up and they question the faith of their parents or any worldview of their parents gave them. But and I don't mind sharing those deconversion stories. I think they're actually fascinating. And there's legitimate reasons to go, is that the best version of Christianity? But using the Phelps family, who thought the end of the world was at a particular date and it was this, it was that, they have this literally enclosed family unit that, I'm not sure that's the best version of Christianity. Say, see, people walk away.
Fred Phelps' his son. And he also escaped. He escaped on his 18th birthday.
Wow.
And became an atheist and became, I think he's actually spoken at some of our conferences from time to time.
So, yeah, there's hope in that.
Yes,
right?
there is.
So Richard Dawkins gets a person who escaped a cult and then became an atheist to speak at his conferences to legitimize a critique on religion. That's fascinating to me because you're just, as I said, you're taking the worst version of a thing and then you're putting them on a stage and going, look, speak against that thing you believe that nobody actually in the world believes. And it's like, because this gives credibility to atheism. It's like, I'm not sure that's the case. Maybe get up and speak to the credibility of atheism on its own merit versus, look, this one person escaped a cult and now became an atheist. Now talk about how bad the cult is. Like, yes, we get it.
How did she exist in that structure while being so intelligent?
I agree. But of course, I feel the same way about apparently intelligent people who believe obvious nonsense.
Yeah.
And it's hard to understand.
Obvious nonsense. So I find that the same thing about people who believe obvious nonsense. And knowing Richard Dawkins, he means people who even believe in God at all. And he deems that obvious nonsense. But it's not obvious, because so often the evidence actually points to it, the idea of God being a fact or being an idea, or at least there be rational evidence. So it's not obvious nonsense. It's not nonsense or obvious. It's actually where the evidence, when it's people looking into DNA, when it's people looking at cosmology, when it's people looking at the science, that everything that begins to exist has to have a cause. The universe began to exist, ergo the universe has a cause. When you're looking at the design, when you're looking at DNA, having information that's libraries of encyclopedias of information built into every strand, all of these are pointing toward something. I'm not saying it's explicitly the Christian God right there. You look at the DNA, okay, there's other evidence to follow with history and the Gospels and the resurrection, all of that to get you there. But it's not obvious or nonsense. In fact, as science has developed and moved forward, it has actually become more obvious that maybe something does exist that transcends matter and nature, that built these things into nature and the way they function, whether it's morality and the fact that we never would have come up with the kind of morality we have based on simply evolutionary theory, based on hundreds of thousands of years of evolutionary thinking wiring into our brain. It wouldn't make sense that we, love our enemy or do this. There's all kinds of morality that we go, it seems to transcend nature and what nature would actually put into us if we were just pure animalistic instinct. So, I think it's not obvious nonsense that God doesn't exist. In fact, science and philosophy and history have continuously, the deeper they've delved, have actually pointed toward the existence of God. So I think, and there's so many great scholars and people, great thinkers. This is not Swamp Thing, Joe Blow and his family that think this. This are people, scholars, people who are credible in all the different disciplines within a university structure or whatever, that actually go, theism actually makes sense. So. Hey guys, thanks for watching. If you have any clips that you want me to react to, put the clips in the comments below. I would love to do my best to react to the things you're thinking about. Thanks.
Thank you.